All right, today we're going to be covering how to write an equation, a sine or a cosine equation, when you're given, first of all, we have a couple different ways that we're going to do this. We're going to do it where if we're given the equation, given the graph, we're going to be looking at, and then first we're going to start with what if we're given the amplitude, the period, the phase shift, and the vertical shift. So we've been working on problems where we're given an equation, we have to find those four things. Now we're going to be given the four things, and now we have to write the equation. So we're going to start with that. So sometimes we're not given all four. So in our first example here, we're going to be given two of the four. All right, so if you remember, this P stands for my period. A is for my amplitude. We can assume that our vertical shift is 0, and we can assume that our phase shift is also 0, okay? Because they don't give it to us. They basically indicate that there's none. So what we know is we know that we have an equation, and it's always the equation of y equals the amplitude times either the sine or the cosine. They do tell me in the directions, and they're going to have to tell you in the directions for these whether it's sine or cosine. And then we have times some k, and then we have our variable x plus or minus. I'm going to put here plus c, and then we have plus our v, our vertical shift. Okay. We need to replace our V here, we need to replace our phase shift, we need to replace our K, and we need to replace our A, okay? So let's go here and say, all right, first I can replace the A. Because I know my amplitude is 12, I can replace this A with 12, okay? Assume that your amplitude is always positive. If they want it to be a negative sign, they would have said in the directions to have it be an inverse sign. Next thing is we had a vertical shift of 0. So we could put in here plus 0 if we wanted to for our vertical shift. A lot of times what we do is we just ignore it. Same thing true for this plus c. I could put in here, instead of plus c, I could put in here plus 0. A lot of times what we do is just ignore it, okay? And we'll have here just our x here. All right. Last thing we need is our k. All right, and that's the only thing that we're going to have to calculate over and over again is our k. All right, let's talk about that. When we calculate the k, I'm going to get rid of some stuff down here, sorry. When we calculate the k, what we do know about k is that the period would always be equal to 2 pi divided by our k. Well, if I move that around and I said, okay, if I multiplied by a k on both sides, then the period times my k would equal 2 pi. If I divided by period on both sides, I would have this really important equation that my k will always equal 2 pi divided by the period. In fact, I suggest you write that really in bold on your notes. This is a really important idea. So just like we knew that the period equaled 2 pi divided by k, my k will always equal 2 pi divided by my period. All right, knowing that, in this problem, my k would equal 2 pi, and my period, I was told here, divided by pi over 2. Well, how do I divide by a fraction? Divide by a fraction, you take your numerator, and you take it and you multiply by the reciprocal of the denominator. So 2 pi times now 2 over pi instead of pi over 2. I took the reciprocal, I flipped this fraction. So now my pi's cancel out, and my answer here would just be 4. My k is equal to 4. So now I can replace this k here with a 4. And this is my final equation. Okay? Let's look at another example, please. All right, so our next example, I get rid of this, get some extra space here, excuse me. My next example here is my vertical shift is 6, my amplitude is 3, my period is 2 pi. Assume that my phase shift is 0. Okay. Again, I want to do this, y equals, and assume that we're still talking about sine here. Amplitude of sine, k, and then we have x, and since we have no phase shift, I'm just going to leave it x like that, and then we're going to say here plus or minus something here. So let's go through the list. The vertical shift being 6 means that it's plus 6 here at the end, that's going to be my constant. The amplitude being 3 means our coefficient of the sine value is 3. The only thing I have to calculate is my k, and that's what I know I'm looking at. Okay, I know that's going to go there. So k would always equal 2 pi divided by the period given. The period given here is also 2 pi. So in this case, my k equals 1. So technicality, I have two options. I can actually put the number 1 in here, or I can just not put anything, all right? And kind of, I wonder if I could do this. Just squeeze everything back together here. So let's see if I can just move these over. Oh, I really got down to the, let's just move everything over. There we go. And that would be my answer. Okay? One more. Let's do one more here. Let's see if we can even go down a little bit further. Now we're looking at, again, we assume that we have no phase shift. You know what? I'm going to go ahead and skip this. I'm going to go 1 through the example. I'm going to do 1 on the example. So I'm actually going to do number 5 in the example. On the worksheet that you've been given, 1, 2, 3, and 4 is a lot like what we've already done. And it's really me checking. Do you know how to find your 4? So just, it's more for my check here. So what I really want to do is let's look at this 5. We have this amplitude, the period, the phase shift, and the vertical shift. So I'm going to start with my equation. Y equals, and it's the amplitude. So 7. I know here we're dealing with sine. So for 5 through 8, we're dealing with sine. So 7 sine. And I'm going to have to calculate a k. I'm going to leave that to remind myself. I have my x, and this is our first chance that we have to deal with our phase shift. I knew that my vertical shift here was -7, so I knew -7 was on the end. So our phase shift is pi. The important thing, or the thing I got to be careful of, is just not to overthink this. If you remember, the phase shift is really just the opposite value here. So here I'd go minus pi, and you're just going to do the opposite sign here, opposite sign, and you're going to add it to your variable. All right, so don't overthink it. You're just going to put it there, and it's going to be always the opposite sign added to the variable. But now our problem becomes, what's our k? That's what we have to calculate. So k, if you remember, our big formula is 2 pi divided by our period. Well, we were told in this that our period is 3 pi. Okay, so 2 pi divided by 3 pi, I would cancel out my pi's, and my answer in the end would be 2 over 3. So what goes here instead of my k, I'm going to get rid of that k, would be my 2/3. My equation is done here. Okay, now let me do another example. So I want to do an example from your test, but I want to do another example here, and I'm going to go back. An example of how do we write an equation, and this isn't on your assignment, so don't look for it on your assignment. It's kind of new. How do we do an equation when we're shown a graph? So now we're shown a graph here. The important thing I'm going to have to do first is say, what's my midline? So when we had these graphs, we always showed our midline. And our midline, this looks a little different than how we graphed it, but we can still figure it out. The midline is this solid line right here that is our solid, kind of, it's purple line for me. And that midline here is at -2, I see. If that's my midline, that's the halfway of my curve that goes around. The highest point on the curve is +2. So to get up to that +2, I'd actually go up 1, 2, 3, 4. I actually go up 4 to get to the highest point. To get to the lowest point, I go down 1, 2, 3, 4 to get to the lowest point. So what this tells me is since my midline is 2, that means my vertical shift, and that's the same thing as my midline, is 2. And -2, I apologize. And then I go up from there and down from there. That means my amplitude must be a +4 or 4. It goes 4 above that, 4 below that. Now it does tell me here that I'm looking at a sine equation here. So it's kind of like I have to say to myself, okay, sine equation would start at, oh, and I kind of messed up here. Actually, I want you to find, I miswrote it. It should say cosine equation here. I apologize. So I want to look at the cosine equation here. And what I want to look at is in cosine, it starts at the highest point, okay? So this one, I would say, actually starts right here. This is where this starts. And it completes its complete cycle, so it kind of comes down here and it comes back up here. It completes its complete cycle by right here, okay? So let's talk between my red lines. It starts at this point, which is pi over 2. Does everybody see how I can see it's pi over 2? We have here is pi over 2 pi. 3 pi over 2, 2 pi. So it's like 1.5. Half, 1. 1.5, 2. 2.5, 3. 3.5, 4. 4.5. So this would be 4.5 pi. And I'm just going to call it 4.5 pi. And here I could even call this one, make it a little easy on myself, 0.5 pi. Okay, half a pi. All right. The distance between the two curves, so like the time it takes or the distance it takes to get a complete curve would be 4.5 pi minus 0.5 pi. It took me 4 pi to get a complete cycle in there. That is my period. Okay, is my period would be 4 pi. So my period here is 4 pi. All right, last thing I need to think about is my phase shift. Instead of starting here at 0, this one starts here at a half. So it actually had a phase shift going in the positive direction of 1/2 pi. So I'm going to call my phase shift pi over 2, or 1/2 pi. They're the same thing. Now that I kind of have my magic 4 here, I can look and see, okay, where is my equation, or what would my equation be? I'm going to kind of put those, I'm going to get rid of those actually, excuse me. So I'm going to get rid of these. All right, so what is my equation? My equation here would be y equals my amplitude. My amplitude is 4. We were told it's a cosine equation. Next thing I need is my k. I need to figure out my k. I'm going to put a holding mark. Y, and then my phase shift was pi over 2, so we just go negative pi over 2. And then my vertical shift was down 2, or negative 2. All right, I have to calculate my k. So my k, I'm calculating it here, is always 2 pi divided by my period. My period is 4 pi. So my k there should be 1/2. So instead of my k, I'm going to put in 1/2. So my equation of my line, I'm going to circle my answer here, is 4 cosine of 1/2, and then times the quantity x minus pi over 2, minus 2. So kind of when you put it into chunks, it gets a little easier, but I know this is definitely a complicated topic. So I want you to go through and solve the rest of these, and we're going to be checking them in class. So I do want to have this whole assignment, or this whole page, done. Thank you.